Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the first expansion for the game The Reckoners, based on a series of young adult novels by Brandon Sanderson. This is The Reckoners Steelslayer. Steelslayer is a modular expansion that adds a number of different ways you can change up the game. Let's head over to the table. I'll kind of just show you briefly how each of those little modules work. Then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, here you see the contents for the Steelslayer expansion for the Reckoners. This is a modular expansion, meaning that you can choose to include some or many of these different modular expansions into the base game of the Reckoners, changing up how the game played. Generally speaking, I think it's safe to say that many of these new elements will increase the difficulty of the game. I will tell you right now that The Reckoners was never a game that I particularly found too easy. However, if you did, this is definitely going to be a way to add a bit of challenge to it. So let me just talk really briefly about the different components that are involved. I'm not going to go into an overview of the game. I'll go ahead and link the overview for the base game in the description of this video if you want to go back and take a look at that. First of all, there are a few replacement cards. They have some cards where they change the ability somewhat for the starting characters in the base game of the Reckoners. Just some slight adjustments to the powers there. We also have new Reckoners. So we've got 4 new Reckoners that you can choose to add, along with their starting card here. Here you can see Exel and Sam and Mitzi, and if I'm mispronouncing these, I apologize, and Valentine with their starting cards. Also, they have miniatures that you can add in. Now, this happens to be the pre-painted version. There are some versions that do not come pre-painted, but these are, and they've got minis for those, and also minis for the 2 new boss epics here that I'll talk about in a second. All right, so you've got some new Reckoners you can add into the mix. Also, we've got new equipment. This can be just combined in with the base game. They do have markings on them to show you right here. That little icon shows that it comes from the Steelslayer set, so if you ever wanted to remove them out, you could. But this is just more equipment that kind of changes how you can mitigate dice, move around the board, help out your team to victory. We also have new epics and epic actions. So basically, this is one thing that you would completely replace the base game with this. This is a new deck of epic cards. They've got kind of retooled versions of ones that you would find in the base game with some new ones. And there are also some new epic actions that kind of change things up in the game. They're going to be utilizing these shield tokens, which can make it more difficult for you to move around and also remove the enforcement tokens, for example. So you've got some shield tokens. You've also got some copy tokens that are going to allow the epics to get even more powerful and cause more damage. But you can just see these work very similarly to the epics in the base game, with, again, some new actions that get added into the mix as well. You also have new boss epics. There are 2 new boss epics that come with the game. You've got Regalia here and Limelight. And if you have read the novels, those are going to sound familiar to you. And you also have a couple of new cities. So New Kago is the city that's in the base game, but we also have 2 new cities here. We've got Babelar, and that's represented by these mats that would go on to the plastic trays that you would use to kind of make up your board. And you also have Ildithia here. And again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing these. I'm not an expert in the lore of the Reckoners by any means. And you'll see that really the main difference with these is they've got spots along the right side for a new marker to kind of go down and track. And that's because these new locations have some different actions that allow you to research the areas, for example, just different ways of kind of utilizing those city district areas. All right. Generally speaking, The new boss epic Regalia is tied to the Babalar city, and Limelight is tied to Ildithia, but they do say that you can mix and match. You can have Regalia as your boss epic in New Kago. There may be some slight adjustments that need to be made, but generally speaking, you can kind of mix those match, but they are tied in a little bit. Regalia is going to work a little bit differently. It's going to have some cards that kind of activate and tell you what they do. A lot of times you're going to be utilizing these tokens that hinder the Reckoner's ability to do things, kind of actually cover up abilities maybe that they've had. Limelight is going to be using this power book to determine their actions, and you're going to be rolling these 4 different colored dice here to utilize these charts, and they're based on difficulty level. You've got beginner and standard and hard and sparks, which is the ultra hard, and again also depending upon number of players, but you're going to be rolling the dice and it's going to tell you in order the different actions that they do. All right, and that's just for Limelight, this power book. Again, any of these can be added into the game. You can change things up. There you even have some cards to change up New Kago, which again was the city that came with the base game. Just ways to kind of change up the game, and again, I'll talk about it in the review, but many of these I found add a significant amount of difficulty to the game. Speaking of heading over to the review, let's do it now. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of change up how the base game works, add in some elements, play a new boss epic, try some new Reckoners. A lot of different ways you can change things up. First thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the art and components, the things that did not work as well for me, the things that did work for me. First off is that I always thought that the art and the components for the base game were quite impressive, and these seem to keep that same standard. You've got the nice thick cardboard, the card quality is good. I like the art within the game, and again, this has a consistent look. Other than that little symbol to tell you that this is coming from the expansion, there's really no way to know that this is any different than the base game. It's very consistent, very, I find it to be, for a game that has kind of this dystopian and a universe that has this kind of dystopian feel, the art doesn't really lean into that too much. It really kind of leans more into the heroism and the excitement of going around these cities and trying to battle against these baddies. The negative to it is that the base game was already a very large game, both in box size and in table footprint, because primarily you're using game trays as part of the actual components that go on the table. And this is going to add a bit to the storage space for you. Now, as far as table space, it doesn't really necessarily add too much, although if you're playing with Limelight, that book, you know, you're going to have to find a spot for that too. But I don't see any way you're getting these expansion components into the base game box, primarily, again, because it works off of these game trays systems that go directly onto the table. And so there's really, I can't think of a way that you're going to be able to consolidate all of this into the box. So it's adding more storage space, and that is something you need to consider. It was already a sizable box. This is adding to it. All right, in terms of gameplay, a couple of things that didn't work as well for me first, and then the things that I appreciated. The first thing is something that I alluded to in the overview, and that is that I have found that everything that this expansion adds to the game adds to the challenge. And as I mentioned again briefly during the overview, I never found the Reckoners to be a particularly easy game to win. I do appreciate and did and still do appreciate the fact that there are multiple ways that you can adjust the difficulty. But even on the beginner difficulty, I found a pretty reasonable challenge in the Reckoners. This is going to add to that. Now, I will say that many of the things that the expansion adds also give you more ways to potentially mitigate those challenges and to make you more powerful as a Reckoner. However, I feel like those mitigations are slightly more subtle than they would be otherwise. And so I feel like this really is an expansion that is aimed towards people that have played the Reckoners a large number of times, have gotten very comfortable with the systems, kind of have their routine that they go through to be successful. This is going to change that up. It's going to add add a significant amount of challenge, also give you more ways to deal with that challenge, but again, it's not as obvious as some of the base game powers that were presented. And so, if you did find the original game difficult to beat, I think that the expansion might even frustrate you, and you may even want to avoid it, because I felt that it was much more difficult to win with pretty much everything that I added to this. Both of the new boss epics I found were more challenging. The regular base epics, and you just change that whole deck out, I felt like they were generally a bit more challenging as well, too. So keep that in mind. If you feel a good challenge with the base game and you're not, bored with it, I don't know if this expansion is something that you're really going to be looking for. On the positive end, the things that I did like is that the changes that were made, while making things a little bit more challenging, felt really, really clever to me, and they were well integrated into the system. They added new dimensions to the game, but it did not change the feel of the game, okay? And so a lot of times that can be frustrating when you're playing an expansion to a game and it really changes the way the game feels. It doesn't feel like the same game anymore. That's definitely not the case here. It really incorporates well, and especially in a modular expansion like this, I never found that any of the modules changed the general flow. Other than they did change, and I feel like this is a positive change, the element of how and when you get the rewards, that you get the rewards kind of right away as part of the same step as defeating an epic. Now you get those rewards right away. That's a positive change, and it allows you to kind of chain these actions together so that because things are more challenging, by changing that step, it made you mitigate some of those things more. So I do like that. And I do love the modularity of the expansion. I tend to like modular expansions because you don't necessarily want to add everything right away. And this allows you to kind of get comfortable with one thing, see if you like it. If you don't like it, you don't have to add it. If you do like it, put it in every time. I like the way that this works with that modularity, and again, I think it's well integrated into the system. Another positive is that the campaign mode that they added can help to a narrative feel for the game. This is a game based on a series of young adult novels. You don't have to be familiar with that series of novels to find enjoyment in the game, but if you are familiar with that and you like being in this universe in a board game environment, then I think if you add this campaign mode in, that's going to even heighten that more. It's going to kind of underscore the narrative element that is sometimes sneaking under the surface of the Reckoners. So all told, this is a game this is an expansion, that I think is really targeting people who are already fans of the Reckoners, feel like they've kind of figured out how they want to play the game and want something to change it up. It is going to add a significant amount of challenge. It also is going to allow you to become more powerful, but again, I think it's going to take a little bit longer to kind of figure out how those mitigation factors work. I feel like this is an expansion that I particularly will enjoy adding into my games of the Reckoners, because the Reckoners is one of my favorite games of all time, certainly one of my favorite cooperative games. So I'm giving Steelslayer an 8 out of 10, a seal of approval, with those caveats involved that it is going to make it more challenging. And if you feel like the challenge is already there in the base game, this might be one that you want to avoid, or at least try before you invest in it. So there you have it. That is the Reckoners Steelslayer. I'm Mike DiLisio, signing off from Dice Tower headquarters.